Rachel Zegler was on such a rapid rise that many assumed nothing could derail her momentum.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
It's not going to be saved by the prince.
After an impressive performance in Spielberg's West Side Story, she seemed poised to take on any role she wanted.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so.
Disney doesn't know what a Disney princess is anymore, which is crazy.
Then came Snow White 2025.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
On paper, it looked like the perfect combination of classic Disney magic and a fresh perspective, an update of the 1937 classic that launched the entire Disney animation empire.
There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
On the original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was a stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever, genuinely, like this was the most prolific Disney film, I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
Yet from the moment Rachel began talking about her modern take, the mood around the film changed.
One major development going on now involves more to do with Rachel Zegler and her attitude towards South Park Studios and Paramount after learning about what they are planning for their upcoming special called the DEI Special.
She made it clear she thought the old version was outdated, implying that certain cherished elements simply did not belong in a contemporary adaptation.
The last time I had the dream, I was walking down the school hallway. And that's when I started to notice that something's wrong. Everyone I cared about has been systematically replaced. And finally, I want to scream, and I'm like, why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse?
Those comments opened the floodgates of criticism. Suddenly, fans who grew up loving the original and praising its historical importance felt insulted. They flooded social media, pointing fingers at Rachel for disrespecting a foundational piece of Disney history. And that was only the beginning. Not long afterward, she gave a series of interviews where she questioned the notion of a damsel in distress storyline, arguing that a modern Snow White should prioritize independence over romance. While many people applauded her stance, a loud contingent on the internet took it as a sign that the production was trashing everything that made Snow White special.
Now active involves more to do with both South Park Studios and Paramount, and what they recently did toward both Zegler and the Disney company for their Snow White film. It turns out that both Trey Parker and Matt Stone are already preparing for the DEI special that is set to serve as a sequel to the Panderverse.
The more Rachel spoke, the more it seemed like the negativity grew. Critics started describing her comments as condescending, as though she viewed fans of the old movie as stuck in the past. The story turned into a steady drip of controversy. New fans were curious, longtime fans felt alienated, and skeptics smelled a potential disaster in the making.
Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed, because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
Rumors about on-set tensions soon emerged, hinting that the production itself was in turmoil. Multiple scripts reportedly circulated, each trying to reconcile a progressive update with the nostalgic glow that people expect from a Disney princess story. Some said Rachel's comments, along with the general fuss around modernizing Snow White, forced the studio's hand in rewriting major sequences.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
Bitch! The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
That's the face
Go
of a
vote blue.
serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Suddenly, budgets were going up, deadlines stretched, and Disney executives began to worry that a project once seen as a surefire hit might be sliding off the rails. Not helping matters was the wave of behind-the-scenes chatter that Rachel herself was becoming more outspoken, both politically and personally. She would hop on social media to endorse strong opinions, which inevitably sparked heated debates online. Traditional Disney fans, who usually prefer their princess movies drama-free, found her frankness jarring. It wasn't just about Snow White's plot anymore, it was about whether Rachel had effectively told big chunks of the potential audience that she didn't want their support.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
Every time she appeared to call out a particular group or poke fun at the old storyline, online boycotts gained a bit more traction. Then came the tipping point. South Park decided to do what it does best, skewer a cultural phenomenon. An episode aired that parodied the entire Snow White meltdown, featuring a satirical take on Rachel Zegler as an actress who believed she was single-handedly saving society by modernizing the film.
It was supposed to come out like a year and a half ago, and then we went after them so hard because of their variety of ridiculous sins that they actually went into full-scale reshoots on Snow White when we announced that we had a competitor.
In typical South Park fashion, the depiction was exaggerated, comedic, and more than a little savage. Clips spread like wildfire. People posted memes pointing out how closely the show's jabs seemed to line up with Rachel's real-life interviews, especially the part where the fictional actress dismissed everyone else's input as backward. It struck a chord. Within a day, social media was ablaze with references to the Snow White fiasco, reigniting fan outrage and inspiring new waves of ridicule aimed squarely at Rachel.
It was the first animated film that had the kind of Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting. And it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story.
Naturally, the rumor mill kicked into overdrive. Some claimed Rachel was beyond furious about the parody, calling it cruel and accusing the show's creators of painting her as a lunatic. Others insisted she deserved it, pointing to her. Past comments about the 1937 film as if they were proof she looked down on the entire legacy.
And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
Meanwhile, Disney higher-ups found themselves in an impossible bind. Should they defend Rachel and risk drawing more attention to the parody, or stay silent and appear indifferent to both their stars' feelings and the public's confusion? As, if that weren't enough, speculation started swirling that the tension behind the scenes had escalated to the point where Rachel's relationship with Disney was strained beyond repair.
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
Promotional appearances for Snow White 2025 began to vanish without explanation, replaced by vague statements about scheduling conflicts. Invitations for Rachel to headline big talk shows quietly disappeared. Industry insiders whispered that Disney was sidelining her to keep the negative press at bay. For her part, Rachel reportedly felt abandoned, believing that the studio was letting her take all the heat alone, rather than stepping up to clarify their intentions for the remake.
God forbid a woman dream about true love. We're all just sitting around here, maybe I could be president one day. I hate men, I just want to be president. That screams Disney princess. Oh my God, I'm literally getting enraged. Once again, I feel like I'm back in 2022.
Stories of friction between her and co-star Gal Gadot also made the rounds. Although Gal typically stays out of controversy, there were repeated suggestions that she and Rachel disagreed on how to approach certain scenes. One rumor claimed Rachel complained that Gal's ad-libbed lines stole crucial moments from the titular character. Another alleged that Gal felt overshadowed by the publicity swirl around Rachel's interviews, leaving them both frustrated about the direction of the film. By the time South Park sank its teeth into the fiasco, fans were already primed to believe this production was a train wreck.
Yeah, the entire film's about a love story. It's about a love story because that's what the point of the film is, and I'm sorry that chivalry and a man pursuing you is now deemed as stalking, which now it's kind of making sense why men are opting out of the dating scene.
Amid the swirling gossip, Bob Iger's name kept popping up. He had returned to Disney as CEO, presumably to steer the company back to stability after a few rocky quarters. But the Snow White meltdown was the last thing the studio needed, especially at a time when other big releases were underperforming.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in probably 17 years.
Even Daredevil and certain Marvel properties had shown signs of fatigue, so the hope was that Snow White would be a guaranteed crowd pleaser. Instead, it turned into a public relations minefield, with each new day revealing another piece of drama, another reason for fans to throw their hands up and say, "What is happening at Disney?"
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian, she is a Latina, she is half Colombian, and so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid, now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she is literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
From the inside, you can imagine the chaos. Executives grappling with the best way to handle Rachel's outspoken nature. Marketing teams unsure how to spin a story that the star herself seemed to be rewriting every time she talked about it, and production crews tearing their hair out over last-minute script changes. And there, in the middle of it all, was that comedic portrayal on South Park, which had tapped into the zeitgeist of frustration and turned it into a half-hour of biting satire.
And that is why we hate the diversity, equity, and inclusion casting and writing in movies.
The show's spoof wasn't just mocking Rachel's remarks, it was lampooning Disney's entire approach to reimagining classic tales, suggesting the studio was more interested in ticking boxes than protecting the genuine magic that fans held dear. For Rachel, the immediate aftermath was brutal. Online threads dissected clips from her actual interviews side by side with the animated parody, highlighting similarities in tone and phrasing.
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
Jokes flew about her crusade to make Snow White a 2025 empowerment tale that conveniently threw away too many of the original's strengths. Some viewers posted the side-by-side comparison. Rachel in an interview telling fans the old storyline was basically worthless, next to a screenshot of the cartoon version screaming at cartoon Disney execs for not being progressive enough.
Where Steven Spielberg and co. were demanding that she prove how Latina she really is, since her name doesn't sound Latina, and she was angrily saying, did I have to bring in my little abuelita for you to believe that I was Latina?
Even supporters of Rachel, those who agreed that older Disney films need modern updates, started admitting that her public presentation might have been too aggressive, feeding the negativity loop. Certain fans proposed that the entire meltdown underscored a bigger cultural conversation. How does a major studio keep a beloved classic relevant without seeming like it's pandering to modern audiences? People asked if Rachel was just the scapegoat, or if her approach genuinely poured gasoline on a flicker of fan concern.
And sure, you could, yes, it's made in 1937, but it boggles my mind that Disney took the film that built their empire.
Yes.
That it is a paradigm shift movie that is sacred text in Hollywood and just...
Meanwhile, well-known commentators pointed out that the real tragedy was how overshadowed the actual film became. For all the behind-the-scenes talent and potential creativity, few people talked about Snow White 2025's plot or aesthetic choices in any meaningful way. It was mostly about Rachel's remarks and the studio's inability to manage them. The more Disney tried to remain silent, the louder the speculation got.
So even though woke in some sense feels like it's dead, it still has to run its course through the system. The ghosts have to get out of the machine in essence.
Some rumors claimed Rachel wanted to release a statement clarifying that she did, in fact, respect the 1937 classic and never meant to demean Walt Disney's legacy. Others said Disney was terrified she'd say something to spark even more backlash, so they quietly nixed any chance for her to speak out. Another theory held that the studio was re-editing entire chunks of the film to minimize Rachel's role, hoping to pivot the marketing onto Gal Gadot's evil queen. None of this was confirmed, of course, but in the chaos, anything sounded plausible.
What's happened is masculinity has been drained out of Hollywood, and it turns out they needed it. That's what it was built on. Now, it doesn't mean, and so is femininity, which, Snow White is essentially feminism versus femininity.
Back and forth gossip about legal disputes also emerged. A few industry gossip columns suggested that Rachel felt Disney was violating some aspect of her contract by restricting her promotional appearances. Another rumor implied that Disney was considering taking action against her if her continuing controversies caused financial damage to the film's prospects. That scenario might sound extreme, but so was everything else in this meltdown.
The fact that Disney's budget for Snow White 2025 was well above $350 million altogether when you're factoring in marketing expenses and everything to do with their overall support for Rachel Zegler.
Each day, fresh rumors popped up online, layering new drama onto an already complicated story. Fans found themselves split into camps. The first camp believed Rachel was an arrogant star who disrespected a cherished property for cheap media attention, forcing Disney to scramble. Another group felt she was a fearless voice calling out the archaic tropes that plague older Disney. Films unfairly targeted by fans who couldn't handle change. A third camp just watched from the sidelines, feeling that the entire fiasco was an entertaining but unfortunate spectacle, one that cast doubt on whether the final movie could ever be judged objectively.
And the audience has spoken. They were, honestly, Glenn, every trailer that hit YouTube was getting ratioed into oblivion. And yeah, so Disney was telling you exactly what this movie was going to be.
It didn't help that Disney's track record with recent remakes had started showing cracks. After hits like The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, fatigue had begun setting in, and some viewers were simply done with the endless cycle of reboots. For them, Rachel's outspokenness, the comedic roast on South Park, and the swirling rumors of behind-the-scenes drama were just confirmation that maybe it was time for Disney to move on from redoing classic cartoons.
Her heroine cannot be in love or be saved by a man, the prince, that she's more focused on becoming the leader she was meant to be, as if women in modern-day America must make that choice.
This meltdown was about more than one actress's comments. It felt like a symbol of a bigger shift in audience tolerance for rehashed material. At the same time, you had cultural critics pointing out that reinventing Snow White wasn't inherently a bad idea. The original, despite its groundbreaking status, does show its age in certain story beats. If done carefully, a new adaptation could highlight messages of empowerment while preserving the essence that made the story timeless. The question was whether that delicate balance was even possible amid the negativity swirling around Rachel and the film's entire promotional strategy.
For every one of the 18 hours I am in the Snow White dress, I expect to get paid. If it's 18 hours, I want 18 hours of pay. I'm sure she got underpaid.
As for the South Park parody itself, it became a defining moment for the meltdown. People who hadn't followed the fiasco suddenly found themselves laughing at comedic exaggerations of Rachel's statements, only to discover that some of what the show was mocking closely mirrored real interviews.
These were movies made with a mindset of identity politics, intersectional feminism, which really goes against what Hollywood had done for hundreds of years, sorry.
The comedic approach was merciless, yet it struck a chord. Fans who felt the new Snow White was too preachy ate it up. Even some who agreed with Rachel's modernization stance found it hard not to giggle at the show's comedic portrayal of the entire meltdown. In the days that followed, speculation turned to how Disney might respond.
Disney is reportedly scaling back on Snow White. This movie is in serious trouble. It's been in production hell forever, and y'all probably know about the controversies because they just keep popping up.
Historically, targets of South Park rarely come out looking good if they publicly protest. So it wasn't surprising that the studio seemed to adopt a don't engage policy, but that did nothing to reassure fans still on the fence about seeing the film, especially if they felt the production had become too chaotic to deliver a cohesive final product. Instead, the silence allowed rumors to multiply. Was the release date being pushed yet again? Had entire musical numbers been axed because of test screenings? Was Bob Iger privately furious at the entire fiasco, or was he letting it ride? Rachel's own silence, perhaps enforced, perhaps chosen, spoke volumes. She went from making near-daily headlines for her remarks to being conspicuously absent from major interviews.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
That abrupt shift felt eerie, as if Disney had decided the best path was to keep her away from cameras until the dust settled. Yet, the dust showed no sign of settling, and fans who once admired her vocal stance on modernizing Disney princesses started questioning if maybe she'd overplayed her hand. Ultimately, the meltdown showed no signs of resolving itself quickly.
25,000 more just like her knocking on the same doors that she had opened to her. She had the opportunity of a lifetime, and instead of being humble and grateful, she was entitled and a snot. And I will look forward to her not getting cast in any more movies for a long time until she actually does learn something about humanity and humility.
Some believed that if the final Snow White 2025 film genuinely wowed audiences, if it captured a new kind of magic that both recognized the original's significance and updated its themes, people might forgive the drama. There's precedent. For that in Hollywood, messy productions sometimes yield surprising hits. However, the storm of negativity was so fierce and the comedic takedowns so widely shared that it was hard to envision a scenario where the finished product emerged unscathed. And that's where everything stands in this extraordinary saga.
And I think this is also, this movie, her reaction, the way they did all of it, I think this is part of the undoing of that era as well.
Rachel Zegler went from a lauded newcomer to a lightning rod of controversy. Disney found itself juggling her outspoken personality with a fanbase protective of tradition, while a comedic juggernaut took aim at the meltdown, amplifying it beyond the usual echo chambers of film gossip.
So she just encapsulates everything that most of us cannot stand about modern-day feminism and the left in general, and Hollywood.
Whether Snow White 2025 will be a turning point in how Disney manages reboots, or simply another example of how not to handle a franchise remains to be seen. Maybe the film will come out and be quietly decent, overshadowed by months of scandal. Or maybe it'll crash and burn at the box office, sealing its fate as one of Disney's most notorious missteps.
And then they couldn't put dwarfs because this is just so typical of the left. The progressives always finding a way to find their way back to doing something not progressive.
In the end, the question is whether there's any real path to redemption for a production that's been so thoroughly dissected, parodied, and slammed before it's even premiered. Could a triumphant opening weekend or a wave of positive reviews wash away?
So, I mean, this woman has clicked every box, and just for cherry on top at the end, she gave an interview last week talking about how they were basically a bunch of white supremacists on the set of West Side Story. That's her thanks to Steven Spielberg, who discovered her and made her. So she's an ingrate, she's annoying, and I think she's probably 2 and done.
The memory of Rachel's controversial interviews and the comedic jabs from South Park, some fans hold on to hope, pointing out that audiences often have short memories if the final product is truly engaging. But others remain convinced that the meltdown, once entrenched in the public consciousness, will linger. No matter how the film performs, Rachel's chapter in the Disney story will likely remain an example of how quickly a star's eagerness to modernize a classic can backfire when perceived as dismissive of the original's legacy. And of course, how a single satirical cartoon can push an already precarious situation into pop culture infamy.